Oh, welcome to the Russ Joy Show. I'm Russ Joy. You figured that out because you're smart. It's also the name of the show. All right, I'm done with the weird dynamic zooming thing. Thanks to friends over at YouTube for this little beauty here, this little puppy. You go away for a week or so, and you come back from vacation, and they send you one of these Jim Jams. So that's pretty cool. Thanks, YouTube. What a 2 weeks it's been. If you've been paying attention to the show, which oddly enough, many of you have across YouTube, the podcast feed, short form content everywhere, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere that the short form stuff goes. Been engaging with it, been doing your thing. I appreciate all of you tremendously. It's been a wild 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, I was in New York and Boston for work, and I said, all right, well, we're gonna be careful here. Gonna try to get through as many shows as possible. It ended up being one. And then, surprise, surprise, last week was vacation, and I decided that I care about my marriage. And so I did one episode instead of the 2 or 3 that I wanted to. I was like, you know what? What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, if I don't do a show for 2 days or 2 episodes, like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's not like the Phillies are going to totally fall apart. It's not like Zack Wheeler is going to probably miss the rest of the season. It's not like Duran is going to, like, take a liner off the foot. That certainly couldn't happen. Those things did happen. Yeah, not great. So I've been trying to keep up with Philly sports from a distance, and now that I've been kind of back and firmly entrenched in my home for about 16 hours now, 18 hours, maybe. It's less. It's about 16 hours. We had a hell of a harrowing journey home from the Outer Banks. I told you guys last week, we stopped at Buc-ee's on the way down to the Outer Banks, and then we very stupidly, and I say we as in my wife and stupidly is probably doing a little bit of lifting there, but we decided that we were going to do Buc-ee's on the way back. That might not have been a good idea. Buc-ee's on the way home on what is already going to be a pretty long drive, right? Like if all things go well and you take the East Coast path, it's like 6.5 hours without traffic. It's probably about 7 hours or so with like even moderate traffic. We decided we were going to go the inland route and go to Virginia where the new Buc-ee's is. And we decided, we're going to do Buc-ee's on the way home. I'm not saying I'd recommend that ever again. I'm not saying that if you're somebody who's like actively in the market to try to get a little bit of Buc-ee's in your life, that you should go to Buc-ee's to and from Outer Banks. Not saying that. In fact, I'd probably say it's not a great idea. When we went on last Sunday morning around 7 a.m., it was crowded and it was breakfast time. And so there were no cookie dough bites, and that was kind of sad. But like, it's manageable. We went there yesterday, this Sunday's afternoon. It was a madhouse. I mean, it was crazy. They have like 100 gas pumps. They were all full. There were lines at all the gas pumps. Every spot practically in this gigantic parking lot was taken. And I realized they didn't build a big enough Buc-ee's. They needed to build an even bigger one. It's about half the size of the one in Katy, Texas that I went to last year. It is a lovely Buc-ee's. I feel bad for all the employees. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people who act like they've never like adulted before, couldn't figure out that, you don't look at the green and red light above the bathroom stalls to decide if that means it's open or not. There's also a little deadbolt that says in use or not. It was crazy. Now, did our kids like Buc-ee's? They sure did. Do I think it lived up to the hype that they wanted it to live up to, that I've kind of built for them? This myth, this legend of Buc-ee's? I don't know. I know they didn't love the breakfast burritos as much as I might have wanted them to. They did say, though, that the sandwiches on the way home were significantly better. And that's what matters. Ultimately, Buc-ee's, Sheetz, Wawa, they're all kind of it's at the user's taste, right? It's at the customer's experience, their level of how infatuated they were with the place, how enamored they were with the mystique and the ridiculousness and the merch and all that kind of stuff. Buc-ee's was a success, but on the way home, it took what should have probably been a 7-hour drive. And I think we spent 11 hours in the car. It was going to be like 5 hours to get to Buc-ee's from Outer Banks and then like another 4 to get home. It's supposed to be about 9 versus 7.5 up the East Coast. And we got caught in our like annual storm on the way back. Now, we are lucky because, thankfully, or not, we got caught in our annual storm, but we didn't get caught in the hurricane. This hurricane that apparently is coming, it's led to an evacuation of Hatteras Island, which I feel bad for everybody who's a renter now. Obviously for the people who own the houses, but for the renters, like you get down there, you probably save up, you go down, and within like a day, a lot of people were getting booted out of Hatteras Island because there's this upcoming hurricane. Now all the locals are saying it's not going to matter, it's going to miss, but it's a state of emergency and they have to evacuate. So anyway, we hope everybody down in the Outer Banks, those of you who watch, because there are people who watch this show and who listen to this show, who sent me some messages over on Twitter, who are like, hey, make sure you hit this place and that place. And I'm not around this week, but make sure you go there. All the people in the Outer Banks, hope you have a safe time. Anybody who's potentially in the path of the hurricane, I hope it doesn't come. I hope it just kind of stays out in the ocean. Now, that's a little bit of housekeeping. We have a lot to get into because, I mean, when you miss time doing this show, and I missed last Wednesday, I missed last Friday, and I think I missed the prior Wednesday and Friday while on the road for work, you start to get a little bit out of your regular cadence. You kind of get out of the rhythm of like, all right, we definitely talked about this, we definitely talked about that. So we got to be careful here because I don't want to rehash things, and I don't want to rehash things that are too far ago. However, there are a couple of newsworthy items that we're going to get to. Now, one of them wasn't listed in the episode description, but I do feel like we have to talk about it at least very briefly, and it's Flyers related. And while I'm bringing this up, I'm going to drop the comments down here, the bottom right-hand corner. There have been comments coming in through YouTube and X. I'll make sure that going forward, they'll pop up here. The ones that already showed up will not populate there, but all the comments for the rest of the show, they'll pop up there. We had a little bit of news about Tyson Foerster that came out. Now, I don't know what it means exactly, and I don't know how legit all of it is, but we're going to get to it because there was a rumor that was put out there. There was a report that was put out there, and I think Martinez was the one. No, it was Bill Meltzer who put it out over the weekend. I think it was over the weekend, or it might have been at the end of last week. But Bill Meltzer put out on Twitter that when reached by text, Danny Briere says that the belief, the hope is that Tyson Foerster is going to be ready for training camp. And obviously that got people kind of going in a tizzy because there has been mixed reporting on how severe the injury to Tyson Foerster is. And I feel like it's probably, I don't know, it's my responsibility, but I'll certainly give you an update and I'll give you a little bit of the info that had been passed along and how maybe you get to a discrepancy when it comes to the reporting of the injury. The first thing, and what's probably the most important, is when you have an injury to a player, there is a lot of misinformation that goes out from an organization. There's a lot of misinformation that goes out from around the team. And sometimes you get really clear and succinct and reportable details, and sometimes there's a little bit of reading between the lines. This infection that Tyson Foerster has in his elbow, there have been a couple of different thoughts and a couple of different theories that have gone around. One was that Foerster just somehow ended up with an elbow infection, which seems a little bit weird. I've not been told it's like a staph infection or anything, so I don't know exactly what kind of infection you get that just like kind of pops up in your elbow for funsies. Typically, there could be like a trauma to a muscle perhaps or a ligament or something that leads to an infection. Could there have been a clean out? Could there have been like some kind of, when we think about the knee, think of like a bursa sac. Could there be something that kind of popped up in the elbow region and maybe there was a clean out attempt and that led to an infection? There had been a thought that maybe there was a tear in the bicep or the tricep. There was conflicting reports about that as well. Could one of those injuries had led to an infection, whether it was the initial injury itself, perhaps a cleanup, if there was a surgery, although the Flyers haven't said there was a surgery, could that have led to the infection? If so, do they have the infection cleaned up? All this gets put out there. There was a thought that he might miss the start of the season. There has long been a belief that Foerster was going to miss the start of training camp, and then it depended on how rosy of an outlook you wanted to think the Foerster injury had. Now, if it was a tear, perhaps the initial read on it was significantly worse than it ended up being. What I will tell you, and I think is important to tell you, is that the Flyers thought that it was bad enough that at the start of free agency, they were actively involved in potentially finding a replacement, at least for the first half of the season. That doesn't mean they were going to try to bring in a one-year rental and then deal that guy at the deadline. What I mean is there were some names that were getting thrown around, and I mentioned a couple on this show. We mentioned a couple on Snow the Goalie. One name that did come up as the Flyers are actually considering it now, knowing that this Foerster injury, the news hadn't broken yet. Brock Besser's name was out there. And that was interesting because he had a previous relationship with Rick Tocchet. And you think, well, if you're going to go after Brock Besser, then clearly the organization thought that the injury to Foerster was bad or was significant enough that they were going to need to get somebody to replace his production for at least the first half of the season. Now, if you go off of the idea that maybe it was a tricep tear, that could be a 6-month injury, that could be an 8-month injury. He's still young. Maybe it's less. If you're looking at that 6 to 8 month window, that would have pushed him into a probably January return. And then, of course, we know that in February, you have the Olympic break. And so, maybe you're trying to bide your time and give him as much time as possible. Maybe he comes back second half of February. It sounds like now the hope within the organization is that Tyson Forster is okay, that he's going to be fine, and that by the start of the season, he'll be there. I've yet to get any kind of a clear belief from anyone of note within the organization that he's going to be ready for the start of training camp. I've yet to get that. It feels like they're kind of hoping he's going to be able to ramp up just ahead of the season opener. But again, injuries are weird. This infection thing that is kind of floating out there as a what is it? How severe is it? Where did it come from? Was there a genesis that led to the infection? With all of that stuff kind of floating out there, I don't know. We can have a report that goes out here that says, oh, cool, yeah, he's going to be back for the start of the season. We don't know. No one's going to know. It might happen. He might be back for the start of the season. He might miss a month. I have no idea. We'll find out. We'll all find out together, won't we? So that was the Forster news. If the Bill Meltzer report and the positivity from Danny Briere is to be believed and is the most up-to-date information, then all right, cool. If Tyson Forster's back for the start of the season, it's good. It does obviously kind of get you starting to think about, where Porter Martone has taken himself off the board, is going to go play in college. Alex Bump was believed to be a guy who had a legitimate path to making the NHL roster out of camp. Does it change anything for him? Does it alter his percentage likelihood of making the team? Do the Flyers look at it and say, we'd rather give the young, hungry guy the opportunity to make the team in the case of Alex Bump, and then maybe you try to adjust accordingly? I think it's probably still at play. I would imagine that the Flyers don't want to say absolutely not to Bump, but it's hard to say right now. When training camp gets underway, you start to get a pretty good feel pretty early on in the player groupings and just the way that a guy kind of jumps off the ice relative to his counterparts, where you get a feeling if the coaching staff starts to believe in the guy, the front office starts to believe in the guy, and that's where you start to get into, all right, are they going to take a longer look at the start of the season? Is it somebody that's going to be like a month-in call-up? Is it a guy who needs to go down to the Phantoms for 2 months? If there's an injury, he comes up, and then he plays himself onto the roster, and he stays. Could happen. But we're so far away from that it's kind of hard to say for sure, okay? So we're going to take the Tyson Forster news. We're going to say, all right, sounds like a positive update from Bill Meltzer, so we're going to put that on the positivity shelf. We're going to take some injury news that we thought was really bad and maybe isn't nearly as bad, and we're going to say positive on the shelf. But we do have to get to the negative news, the negative injury news that broke over the weekend, and it's really, really negative news. And I saw that Brianna Torres here says Phillies won, which is true. Won 2 out of 3 against the Nationals. All's great. Everybody loves that, except it's kind of tainted in a way, right? Because 2 things happened over the weekend that you have to be upset about. One is something that's just not controllable. It's just one thing that you cannot, under any circumstances, prepare for. It's nothing you could get ready for. It's nothing that you can bank on. Zack Wheeler's hurt, and it's not he tore something in his elbow. It's not that he pulled a hamstring. It's not that he's got a blister on his pitching hand. It's not that. The news is bad, okay? And there are people who are trying to spin it a little bit more positive, and obviously until we know directly from the team what the course of action is going to be, what the timeline is, we can only speculate. But this came out on Saturday. Jeff Passan put out that Phillies ace Zack Wheeler was placed on the 15-day injured list with a blood clot near his right shoulder. The timeline for his return is unclear. It's obviously about as bad of information as you could have gotten. It impacts the Phillies' best pitcher by far, one of the best pitchers in the National League, if not all of Major League Baseball, a guy that every Phillies fan knows needs to be on this team and part of the rotation for this team to have every bit of its best chance of making it to a World Series and ultimately trying to win one. It doesn't mean that the Zack Wheeler injury is a back-breaking season-ending kind of injury, but it certainly does feel like a lot of the wind came out of the collective sails of the Phillies and Phillies fans. And then it got worse because the Zack Wheeler thing is bad. and I'm not going to downplay it. It is bad. The blessing in all of this is that they caught it, right? Blood clots, scary. What if they hadn't caught the blood clot? You know what that means. You know what that could lead to. This could have been a catastrophic life event for the Zack Wheeler family. So thankfully, they caught it. That's the most important thing. We have to remove the fandom for a second and say on a human level, we're obviously very happy that the Phillies doctors or whichever doctor caught this blood clot where they did, when they did, and that hopefully they're going to be able to rectify the issue and that it's not going to be something that's ultimately going to have a much more negative outcome that a blood clot can lead to. Now, I saw, and I don't remember what the show is, and I feel bad, and if I can at some point, I'll edit it back in, but there was a show that there was a doctor who was on the day after, or maybe it was the night after Jeff Passan's report came out about the blood clot, and it was a doctor talking about thoracic outlet syndrome, which obviously gets everybody's head kind of going, because where have we heard of thoracic outlet syndrome before? Markel Fultz. And this seems a little bit different. Talked about different kinds of blood clots, different placements, how you could get those blood clots. But it seems like from everybody, right? From just about anybody who has any idea what thoracic outlet syndrome is or a blood clot in an upper extremity, in that shoulder or near the shoulder, it sounds like his season is done. Now, there are a couple of complicating factors here, right? There are people who say, well, hey, what does that mean? Like, is there a path to Zack Wheeler like taking blood thinners, right? Is there a possibility that Zack Wheeler could get himself back into the rotation before the end of the regular season or for the postseason? And it doesn't seem like it. Now, let me see. There is a sports medicine doctor. Let me see. Hold on. Let me double check this guy before I throw him up here on the screen really quickly because I saw this guy, but I want to make sure that he's legit. Let's see. I think this guy's legit. I'm a little bit worried. Is this guy a legit doctor? He's got 139,000 followers. I got to imagine that he's real. I got to imagine that he's a real, actual human being. Let's see. It seems legit. Okay. So there's a doctor over on Twitter. This doctor puts out the idea that it's most likely season ending for Wheeler. It's a big blow. Usually requires a minimum of being placed on 3 months of blood thinners. You're not allowed to play on blood thinners in Major League Baseball. It's a legitimate issue. And unfortunately for the Phillies, it's like, I don't know how they get through this Wheeler absence and still have as legitimate of a chance to make or win a World Series. Like, if we're being fair here, and I don't want to be a Debbie Downer today, right? First time doing the show in a week. I don't want to come back and be a Debbie Downer for everybody. I don't want to be a killjoy. I want to be a Russ Joy, not a killjoy. But I have to be fair. If you remember, Wemby, and I saw him in the comments, Video Guy Amadeo drops this, Wemby had a blood clot that ended his season last year. They're too unpredictable to risk. On a human level, do you want Zack Wheeler to pitch? I don't. On a human level, I don't. I want them to take care of Zack Wheeler and make sure that he is fine. I think he's got 2 little kids, right? His wife just had their second child, I think. Like, no, I think I have more care for the Wheeler family right now and for Zack Wheeler, making sure that, he does what's best for him and his family, more so than does pitcher get back out on mound and throw ball. Now, I know that there are certainly people who would hear that and probably pitch a fit about it because people are fucking insane. But, like, in fairness, I care more about the human being and that guy's health and his family than I do about him going out and trying to help the Phillies win a World Series. Now, it does throw a wrench into a lot of things because, as we've been talking about on this show for weeks, if not months, the way that things have been setting up with this Phillies team is such that they needed a dominant rotation into October, and they needed the bats to not go totally silent, which is what has happened for the last few years in the playoffs. We knew that they were going to need a Herculean performance from the starting rotation to even keep this team in games. And yes, this lineup still does have thumpers in it. It still has a Bryce Harper who has some thump back in that bat. It has a Kyle Schwarber who's been an absolute beast. Nick Castellanos, who, oddly enough, went yard against the Nationals. You have Alec Boehm, who returned. Oh, well, let's see what he's got. I don't know that it's a ton, but we'll see. Trey Turner occasionally pops off. You just never know with this team, right? But all of that in mind, we knew that the rotation had to be as good as it can be. And it is a massive blow to lose Zack Wheeler. There's no getting around it. This isn't like losing your number 3 pitcher. It's not like losing a guy who was, a fringe guy to make the rotation. This was the anchor. This was the ace. Him being out is catastrophic to the Phillies' chances of winning a World Series. Now, it doesn't mean that everything's over. If this lineup, which I don't trust, and many of us don't trust, if this lineup is able to produce at an even remotely acceptable level, they should be able to have a nice playoff run. And maybe we see Christopher Sanchez and or Ranger Suarez really pick up the slack, pitch like bona fide ace or ace adjacent level guys, and that leaves you with a third pitcher that you need to have. And this is where things get worse. Because where things get significantly worse is the guy that came back into the rotation. Because the Wheeler news breaks on Saturday, and you go, this sucks. And then you go, from a baseball perspective, from the perspective of believing in the baseball gods, you want to believe, all right, Wheeler's out. Let's get back the guy who's been a multi-time opening day starter. Let's get Aaron Nola back in the rotation. He's missed a lot of time. Get him back in against the Nationals. What if the Phillies even gave Aaron Nola some run support? Phillies get out to a 6-0 lead on Sunday. I'm driving back from Outer Banks. We stop at a rest stop. I look, Phillies are up 6-0. Aaron Nola seems to be doing okay through a couple innings. I'm feeling pretty damn good about things. We get to the next rest stop about 2 hours later, and I see it's 6-6. I'm like, you gotta be kidding. I'm not expecting a lot. Aaron Nola's missed a lot of time. I'm not expecting Aaron Nola to be an ace. I'm not expecting him to be a 1. I'm really not even expecting Aaron Nola to be a 2. I just need him to be a serviceable 3. He finally gets back into the rotation. I think to myself, you know what? Things have got to be okay. I got to imagine that Aaron Nola is going to be fine enough. You give him a 6-run lead. Maybe he gives up 3. Maybe there's a couple of long balls. He gives up 4 runs, but you still win the game. Maybe like 7-4 if the bullpen has a rough time. Maybe 7-5, 7-6. Still a perfect enough performance that you feel, all right, cool, we can build off of this. Let's get Aaron Nola kind of feeling better, getting his confidence back. And you could go into a postseason if you're without Zack Wheeler and say, Christopher Sanchez, Ranger Suarez, Aaron Nola, we're feeling pretty good. It's not as good as having Zack Wheeler, but it's still pretty damn good. But Nola couldn't do that. You couldn't rely on Aaron Nola. And the shitty thing is, he's missed so much time that you wanted to believe he was going to come back in and be fine. You wanted to believe that Aaron Nola was going to be able to come back into this rotation with time away, being able to clear his head, and he was going to come back here physically better than ever, ready to go, refreshed, rejuvenated, and maybe in the best shape of his life going into a playoff run, right? Bring him back in mid-late-ish August, healthy and like in form for September, October. You're feeling great about it. And God forbid you get bad news about a guy like Wheeler or even Christopher Sanchez. You say, Aaron Nola, we have a bona fide guy that can go in there and get us some wins. But he couldn't do that. He lasts 2 1/3 inning. He allows 6 earned runs, 7 hits on the day, 4 strikeouts, 1 walk. It was bad. There's no way that you can walk away from the Aaron Nola performance and feel like, oh, no, they're okay. Things are still fine with Aaron. No, they're not. This isn't good at all. This isn't even like close enough to being good. It is piss poor, to say the very least. Now, are we going to try to extend a little bit of grace to Aaron Nola? Are we going to try to sit back and say, you know what? It's been a while. Aaron Nola still needs to get back into form. Had a little bit of a rehab stint, came back into the rotation. It was his first start in 3 months, right? The last time he had started before this was May 14th at home against St. Louis. You go, all right, let's extend him a little grace. Let's say this was a really shitty 3rd inning out of Aaron Nola. We're going to try to extend him a little bit of grace, and we're going to say, you know what, Aaron Nola, it's fine. This sucks. We still got the win. Phillies still win 2 of the last 3. You still feel okay about it, despite getting this really awful backbreaking news about Zack Wheeler. You go, you know what, Aaron Nola? It's okay. We're going to feel fine. We're going to just take a moment. We're going to let this wash over. Get ready for your next start. Except there is no one right now who can honestly look at another Phillies fan or look at anybody and say, yeah, I still trust that Aaron Nola, the multi-time opening day starter, a guy who at different points in his career has had, some Cy Young hype, I believe that guy is still in there. There's nobody who believes that. If they do, they need their head checked. My old pal Anthony Sanfilippo for a long time has waxed poetic about Aaron Nola. Told me how wrong I am about Aaron Nola. Aaron Nola is so much better than you people give him credit for. You people. What do you mean, you people? What do you mean, you people? Aaron Nola is not a great pitcher. I'm not even sure Aaron Nola is a good pitcher anymore. And there's enough evidence over the last few years to show there's something off here. Seems like a good dude. He was on Phightin Words. He was on with Ant and Big Bat Bob, and they had a great interview. And Aaron Nola seems like a good dude. Aaron Nola seems like a dude you'd want to, go fishing with. Have, 7 beers with. He seems like a good dude. I'm not railing against Aaron Nola, the human being, but Aaron Nola, the pitcher, is so far away from being what the Phillies need him to be. And for him in his first start back, to blow up like this, the day after the Phillies get the news about Zack Wheeler, it can't happen. I'm not saying he needed to be perfect. If he goes 4 1/3 inning, gives up 4 earned runs, leaves a couple guys on base, the bullpen bails him out, we say, hey, for your first start back at the major league level, not bad. He gets put out to a 6-0 lead. It's not even like he got 4 innings in and the Phillies are getting 1 hit on the other side and he's like, oh, I've got to pitch perfectly. That's always been the problem with Aaron Nola, right? He's had criminally low run support through a lot of starts in his career. He didn't even have that. He had a 6-run lead. There's pretty much no pressure on Aaron Nola except to go out and not implode. But implode is exactly what he did. So that's a huge negative, and I hate the fact that it's a negative. Now, again, the Phillies get the win. You feel good about it. You start to say, all right, can they put it together over the next series against the Mariners? Are they going to get it done? Are they going to feel good about themselves? Can they win a series against the Mariners? And then, you look at the projected matchups. You got Ranger Suarez going tonight against Logan Gilbert, who's had, decent enough season, 3-4 on the year, 3.31 ERA, 124 strikeouts, not bad. Luis Castillo is supposed to pitch in the 3rd game of the series. He's got a 3.48 ERA, 125 strikeouts. He's had a similarly good season to Logan Gilbert. You have Suarez, you have Sanchez going on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, you've got Mr. Who the hell knows what to get out of him in Jesus Luzardo. Now, I will point out, right? Jesus was in the tomb. Everybody was like, he's dead. They brought the guards in. They rolled the stone. That was it. A few days later, stone is moved. Guards are gone. They go. They look. Jesus is gone. Boom. He's there. Everybody's happy, right? A very nice simplification of, the resurrection. If that happened, can we get a tomb for Jesus Luzardo? Can we take Jesus Luzardo and put him somewhere and put a big door? Can we put him in a bank vault? Do they have ventilated bank vaults? Can we put Jesus Luzardo in a ventilated bank vault for 3 days? And then 3 days later, he comes out and he pitches. And we go, there's the guy that we knew from the first part of the season when he looked like a Cy Young candidate. Can we do that? La resurrección de Jesus Luzardo. Bueno. That'd be amazing. What a story. Zack Wheeler goes down. Jesus Luzardo. He is back. He's ready to pitch. That would be amazing. I would love it. Would you love it? Of course you'd love it. What better thing could we have going into the postseason, right? If Aaron Nola is going to be an absolute disaster, which he is. If Aaron Nola is going to be a disaster, can you imagine if you could at least get a month and a half here of Jesus Luzardo looking like early Cy Young candidate Jesus Luzardo going into the playoffs? Sure, wouldn't be ideal. Suarez, Sanchez, and Luzardo are all lefties. Not great. You want a righty in there somewhere. 3 lefties, probably not ideal. But if Aaron Nola is going to be, blow chunks all over himself, Aaron Nola, you don't have much of a choice. Andrew Painter. No. Not in the playoffs. Not now. No. Ideally, you get Aaron Nola back to some kind of decent form. Luzardo goes to the bullpen. We all feel good. I don't know. You guys got to let me know. Okay. That is our Aaron Nola diatribe. That is, Amadeus says, Saiwan Walker. Please no. Absolutely not. He also asks, how will Sanchez respond to being the de facto ace as well? I have to assume that at this point, Christopher Sanchez knows exactly what's expected of him. Christopher Sanchez knows this is now his staff. There is no getting around it. With Zack Wheeler out, likely for the rest of the 2025 season and probably missing the playoffs as he hopefully gets everything taken care of with this blood clot, Christopher Sanchez knows it all falls on him. Now, in fairness, in a positive light, he's got Ranger Suarez backing him up. Suarez pretty damn good. If you can get either Luzardo or Nola kind of pitching at least remotely, consistently, not terribly, Nola, or not tipping pitches or whatever the hell's been going on for a good chunk of the season with Luzardo, then you feel a little bit better about this team going into the playoffs. Still, again, not as good as you felt about a Zack Wheeler anchored staff, but we will see. I will say that a lot of the positivity I was feeling about the Phillies about a week ago has dried up, which is unfortunate, but we have to be realistic on the show. We have to be. And we're going to move on. Now, there are a few different things that we can go to. And I'm going to take you to a place that I think does matter. And that is a little bit of media stuff. Now, I saw something happen, and this wasn't in the show notes either. I saw something happen in Philly Sports Talk Radio that got me excited. I saw some Philly sports stuff happen that made me say, oh, somebody finally gets it. Somebody finally understands. Somebody understands the assignment at hand. And so I think we called this out last week. Maybe we didn't. But I want to show you a tweet that went out, and I'm going to show you a video by this guy. So we've talked on the show in the past about Bill Colarulo over at 97.5 The Fanatic. We've had a lot to say about 97.5 The Fanatic over the past year on this show. And I had a lot to say about them back in the Crossing broadcast days. But Bill Colarulo over the weekend put this out, and I think it was worth taking a look. So Bill, who's now the afternoon host, he was a midday co-host with Mike Missinelli, who has since been let go. We talked about that last week. Bill Colarulo tweets, I love that people who have not watched a single training camp practice are talking about Jalen Hurts not having a great camp. Philadelphia fans, stop the insanity and make the switch. It's supposed to be sports talk, not rage bait. Now, why that's interesting and why the make the switch thing is interesting is because finally, somebody at 97.5 The Fanatic has figured out that in order for them to get any kind of a real hype going, in order for them to get anything starting to move in the right direction for them, they've got to meet WIP head on. They have to. And to this point, it's been pretty ugly, okay? WIP has been dominant, and it's being really generous to the Fanatic to just call it dominant. But you get this tweet last week, or was the week before, from Bill Colarulo. It's a clip from Unfiltered, their afternoon show. It was the same day as the tweet that he put out. And I want to go through this because Colarulo, I think, did a very good job of making the case to the Philadelphia Sports Talk fan who might be feeling kind of left out in the cold. That if there was a time that you used to listen to like Bruno and Mays, and then the Missinelli, or you'd listen to like McNow's show or whatever, if you've kind of felt left out in the cold because WIP has a certain way of going about this, a lot of hosts do, not all of them, but a lot of their hosts have a certain way about going about things, or some of their on-air contributors have a certain way about going at things. Then you have 97.5, which is like trying to do a very watered-down version of what the WIP side of thing is, which I've said many times isn't going to work. You finally had Colarulo, who threw down the gauntlet a little bit. Now, he didn't mention the other station by name. He didn't mention WIP by name, but he did throw something out there, and it got me thinking. So we're going to go over here to Bill Colarulo because, again, I think this was a very notable first strike across the bow, we'll say, of WIP. Let's listen to what Bill Colarulo had to say.
I have never been more frustrated in my life with the state of sports talk in this city. See it on social media all the time. I see all of you saying that sports talk is insufferable. It's unlistenable. You are spot on. That sports talk is
Okay, we have to be careful. Okay, I'm going to be fair because I have to be fair. This is my job. I am fair. I critique the teams and I dissect the media that cover them. Sports talk isn't just insufferable on one station. It's insufferable in a lot of different places according to a lot of different people. Now, as I have been very clear about for a long time, I will tune into some radio shows sometimes. I am not an avid Philadelphia sports talk listener. I really haven't been since college. There have been times that I've been I wouldn't say loyal listener, but a pretty frequent listener of some hosts. I've been very clear on this show that I think Joe Giglio and Hugh Douglas do a very entertaining midday show. There's a lot of fun to be had on that show. They're not everyone's cup of tea. I like their show. I've said in the past that I think Sal Chunas, pretty talented guy. I don't particularly like John Kincaid's style of radio. In fact, I think the Fanatic will be better off whenever his contract runs out to let that shit run out and either replace him or just give that show to Sal Chunas. You have this midday thing that we'll get to in a little bit, and then you have Colarulo. Now, Bill has kind of had this pretty precipitous rise where he was a midday co-host of Mike Missinelli. Now he's doing the afternoon show, and I haven't seen the ratings book yet, but I'd have to think that he's doing a pretty good job. But again, he's calling out the state of sports talk radio. Now, in fairness, you might not like all of the WIP shows. You might not like all of the 97.5 shows. I think that there are issues with many of the shows. No show is perfect. If it were, it would have a perfect rating on the radio. Literally every sports fan will be listening. So there's always something to learn from and something to grow with. But we can't just say that it's the other station. It's both stations. Okay, let's continue.
Insufferable. It is unlistenable. And it continues to this day where they're going to take shots at Jalen Hurts. Make the switch. Ever been more?
So I do like the fact that there's this make the switch. I think when you have a tagline, it's a very good thing. It's a good thing to have a tagline. Make the switch is pretty catchy. Okay, we'll continue.
Be concerned that Jalen Hurts is having a bad training camp, and it's coming from people who haven't seen a damn practice at training camp. I can't take it anymore.
I can't tell if that's an Elliott Shore Parks thing or not. I imagine that Elliott Shore Parks is at camp, but this whole concept of Jalen Hurts is having a bad camp or not having a perfect camp, is that a concern? No, it's not a concern. Who gives a shit? I don't care. Do you care? If you do, get your head checked. It doesn't matter. I've said for a long time, I think training camp stats are the dumbest shit ever. It took J.J. Watt, going public with his disdain for it, for people to start kind of wrapping their heads around it. The whole tracking of training camp stats is dumb. The only reason that it has value is for somebody who wants the fodder, who wants the engagement, who wants the interaction. Now, I don't blame a reporter or a writer or a personality for using that as content and a way to grow their following so that when the games do matter, they have a much larger following. I don't blame Elliott Shore Parks conceptually for the idea of training camp stats. I think they're dumb. I think that when they're given a ton of credence and treated as if they do matter, that's where I have the bigger issue. But Colarulo says, all right, we'll keep going.
I'm right there with you. We are never going to do that on this show. I will never do rage bait. We will never do clickbait.
You gotta be careful with those kind of, absolute promises. We'll never do rage bait. Now the first time or the next time that Colarulo and Ricky Batalico do any kind of a rage bait, a clickbait thing, they're going to get called out, but okay.
Make the switch. And if you're listening to us, you probably already did. Tell your family and friends.
That's an interesting line. This is one of the things when you go off the cuff versus a prepared statement. If you're listening, you probably already did. Okay. There's an implication there that a lot of people who are now listening to the show were switchers. Does that mean that you're acknowledging that there wasn't a very large listener base in the afternoon from the Tyrone Johnson-led best show ever? Maybe. Is that a great look? I don't know. It's not my station.
Save them from it. Save them from the rage bait. Save them from the clickbait. Because Jalen Hurts just won the damn Super Bowl.
That's a good point.
He was just named the Super Bowl MVP. And you're talking about training camp. And we're going to really ask the question if we should be concerned that he's having a bad camp when you haven't even seen a damn practice?
That's the funny thing that makes me chuckle.
I can't believe what goes on sometimes in this city.
So, it's a very interesting take. It is the first shot across the bow, and you have here, Amadeo says, it's probably a shot at Spike and Fritz in the afternoon. I would think that it has to be more of a shot against radio hosts than somebody who's down actually covering the practice. So, it's interesting. I don't know what to think, guys. I really don't. I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if Colarulo taking shots like this periodically is going to work. I think it's certainly worth an effort. I think it's worth a chance. I think that what 97.5 needs, truly, they need somebody who can be a weasel or somebody who can like needle WIP and kind of like goad WIP into making mistakes. And so I don't think Colarulo is a weasel though. Like they need a weasel. They need somebody who like isn't afraid to like nip at the ankles of the other station. They actually could use somebody who's not afraid to call out the other station by name. I am not saying that they should hire Josh Innes. I am interested, though, in what they're going to do. Because here's the thing. We talk about this stuff all the time, right? Just the way that ratings go and how important the lead-in is, right? This is on TV. It's on radio. It's on all kinds of things, right? If the show before the one that you're concerned with has a bad listenership, has a bad viewership, it's going to inherently hurt the next show. If there's a really strong lead in, a very large group of people listening or watching, that's going to probably carry some momentum into that next show. Now, there are going to be people who fall off, and there are going to be people who weren't listening or watching the previous show. They're going to listen or watch, or they're going to join. There are new people getting into the show. I think 97.5 is in such a bad spot because of how horribly they're getting crushed in the morning. And I don't know what they could do there, right? They're not going to bring Angelo Cataldi out of retirement, right, to go to the Fanatic and run the morning show. That would certainly be interesting. That won't happen. I can't envision a scenario where they bring in Josh Innes, although that would certainly be notable. I don't know who they could bring in. You know, like there was the conversation years ago about like after Mike and Mike split, could bringing in Mike Golick be enough of a name, enough of a local flair, but enough of the national cachet that you say, all right, that's a guy that we want to listen to in the morning. And in fairness, there were a lot of people that for many years listened to Mike Golick and Mike Greenberg in the morning, and there might be a nostalgia factor to having Mike in the morning. What if you had Mike and Mike Jr., Mike and Mike in the morning on 97.5? Does that move the needle? Maybe it does. I don't know. There's nobody out there right now that makes me say, yes, that guy going to the morning is going to fundamentally change things. And where the Fanatic is in a really weird spot is in the midday, right? Because you have Colarulo doing this make the switch thing, which again, I think is smart. You have a very tough lead-in in the morning with the morning show. And now you got this middays thing where Missinelli was not able to move the needle enough to justify, I guess, his salary. And we talked about this last week, but the Fanatic unceremoniously let him go. Did not give a guy who like really did help build that station up and take it from AM to FM, and let that guy like even have a goodbye to the fans, even like a sort of weird one like he did the first time where he said, hey, today's my last day, and it was kind of weird, and people were like, what the hell's going on? They didn't even give him that. They're in a weird spot, because what do you do in the middays? Who's available in the middays? Who can go after it in a meaningful way? The only name right now that you say, all right, if that guy goes there, is probably Jon Marks. Does Marks go to the mornings? Does Marks go to the midday? What's the current status of Anthony Gargano's contract with PHLY? You know, I could tell you that there was some scuttlebutt. I think we talked about this last week. There was some scuttlebutt about a year ago that Gargano and Missinelli might have both ended up at PHLY doing something together. Could there have been a Missinelli leading into Gargano over at PHLY? And that never came to fruition. Gargano's still doing his show. Could Gargano have led into a Missinelli-led show in the afternoon? Again, that didn't come to fruition. Never happened. Is there a path to a Gargano reunion with the Fanatic? I find it very hard to imagine. You have to go, and you could go find all of this over on Crossing Broad from the litigation between Beasley Media, the owner of 97.5, the Fanatic, and All City, the owner of PHLY. You can go back to like how nasty that was. There was a thought at some point that maybe the Fanatic would kind of like have dual talent contracts with some of the people at PHLY, which actually would have been very smart for both outlets to have the radio component to what they were doing, as well as having the talent themselves. Because if we're being honest here, Devon Givens was a huge loss for 97.5. Gargano was a big loss for 97.5. There are people who are over on PHLY that would have been good radio people or would have at least done a very good job as contributors and made the Fanatic a stronger station. That didn't happen. I think there's enough bad blood between those two entities, between Beasley and All City, that I find it very hard to imagine that you're going to get Gargano going back to the Fanatic. But anything could happen. I mean, if Gargano and Missinelli wanted to do something together at PHLY, was there ever a path to having Missinelli and Gargano do something on the Fanatic? I can't imagine, but then again, weirder things have happened in radio in Philadelphia. So we get back to Jon Marks. He's the only guy that makes sense. Now, the question, if you are the Fanatic, is does Jon Marks move the needle enough? I happen to like Jon Marks. I happen to think Jon Marks is very good at what he does. If you look at the way that a lot of people talk about the afternoon show on WIP, there are a considerable number of people who seem to miss Marks on that show. It's a different show. I said this at the time. Like when Marks left over there, I said the afternoon show will continue to win because I thought it was significantly better than the best show ever on 97.5. But like every time you have a host that switches out, it changes the show. It's almost impossible to have the show feel, sound, look the same. It's always going to change. If Marks goes to middays, is he going to be able to take a significant enough chunk away of the Giglio and Hugh Douglas listeners? I don't know. Will it work? I would imagine that Marks has enough of a following and has done a good enough job of keeping himself relevant in the digital space, which Missinelli, frankly, could not do after his first departure from the Fanatic. Marks maybe has a better shot of connecting with a listener demographic that the Fanatic wants than Missinelli did. Now, again, it ain't going to change the fact that it is a bloodbath in the morning. It is not going to change the fact that WIP has a significant lead in the morning. Will Marks be able to pull people over from WIP's morning show, right? The people who are listening there, and get them to change the dial, to get them to change their app, to go to the Fanatic for midday, and then stick around for Colarulo. Now, where it gets interesting is, if you are an everyday sports talk listener, and you say, you know what, I really enjoy the WIP morning show, and I'm going to give Colarulo a shot in the afternoon, where are you going midday? Like, maybe this is where it finally does get interesting, but I don't know what to make of it. I think Marks is going to do a good job. I imagine that if Marks is going to take over the middays, which I think the Fanatic would be pretty stupid not to do at this point if he is available and free and clear, which I assume he is, he would do a very good job in middays. I don't imagine that Marks would want to go back to doing mornings. If he does, what do you do at the midday show? Who takes over in the middays? Because again, you need to be able to build into that afternoon show. If they go with this like Salchunas and Kincaid thing in the morning, Marks in midday, and then Colarulo doing the make the switch thing in the afternoon, the Fanatic isn't going to win, but they will have a chance of like at least being somewhat relevant again. Right now, they're just not. Here's the thing that I find interesting, and maybe at some point we'll get clarity. Maybe at some point this will come out. I have a question, though. Missinelli, when we pulled up his tweets last week, said that he had made it known that he was going to, he intended to retire at the end of his contract, which was around February, presumably after the Super Bowl. Well, if Marks was free and clear from PHLY, were they going to have Marks do the morning to lead into Missinelli, to lead into Colarulo? Or are they going to have Marks go over and do the afternoons, which I don't think was going to happen, right? Like, big reason he left WIP, he said, was not being available for his family in the afternoons, so I'd like to believe that he's telling the truth. Didn't want to do afternoons. Were they going to have Marks come over do the mornings, or were they going to go Marks, Missinelli, Colarulo? Were they going to go Marks, Colarulo, Missinelli in the afternoon for a little bit, and then when he retired, they were going to move Colarulo up? And then I don't know. Is there a path that, like, Marks and Colarulo could have done the afternoon show? Maybe. I kind of doubt it. Could they have put Marks with Kincaid and Salchunas? Oh, I don't know. That would have worked. Could they have put Marks for football season with Missinelli and middays? That would have been interesting. That would have been a pretty funny dynamic, seeing as how Marks was once a producer for Missinelli. But boy, oh boy, I have no idea what's going on at the station. But I got to tell you, I think Colarulo is on to something with the make the switch. If the Fanatic were to bring on Jon Marks, I think it's a good hire. But who else can you get? And how do you fix the morning? How do you pull listeners away from WIP in the morning? Until they figure that out, they ain't winning shit. There are ways to improve the Fanatic. There are very simple things that the Fanatic could do, should do, and haven't done yet. I still don't know why they haven't done them. And anybody who understands anything about radio and TV and digital together could probably point them out within 5 minutes. I have to assume that there are people at the station who are cognizant of the things that the Fanatic could do to fundamentally change their fortunes, or to at least give themselves a better chance of changing their fortunes. It's not that complicated. It truly isn't. There are like 3 steps they could take production-wise to make their station stand out, to make it different, to make it better. I don't know why they haven't done it yet. But they can always find me. They can always find out how to get in contact. It's not very hard to find me. And I'm not saying bringing me on. I saw Chris Fried over here says, Russ quietly wants to be the morning host? Absolutely not. I don't think there's any amount of money you could pay me to want to go to bed at like 8 o'clock at night and wake up at 2:30 in the morning to drive to Ballackinwood and do a morning show. No offense to Ballackinwood. I do love me some Hymies. If I can go get a corned beef or a roast beef special every day, I'd be very fat, but I'd be a very fat, happy guy. No. Okay. Jamie asks over on YouTube, what if they do the ESPN radio morning show, whatever that is, and then at 9 or 10 do Marks and Saltunis until the afternoon show? I guess they could. I guess the real question is, would people locally listen to the ESPN radio stuff again? You have to remember, there was a time that Philly radio people wanted a local show so badly that you ended up with Marks and Gargano in the morning on 97.5. Like that happened. That actually did happen. That was a thing that happened. Because people were sick of listening to Mike and Mike, or were sick of listening to ESPN programming. Now, again, there was a report over at Crossing Broad that apparently they're going to start cutting the night shorter and flipping over to ESPN programming earlier in the evenings over on the Fanatic going forward, and that on the weekends they're going to have a lot more ESPN programming. Talked about this in the past. I know that I was told back in the 610 ESPN days that there was some money that came from ESPN or the Disney Corporation or whatever to have that ESPN content played on 610 ESPN. I wonder if we're a company that could use money like Beasley, are they looking at cutting talent costs and then also perhaps getting a little bit of money from ESPN to air that syndicated content later on in the night and, of course, earlier on the weekends? We'll find out. Chris Fried says, as the $1 Million Man says, everybody has a price. I don't think I have much of a price for it. Honestly, I don't know how I would do doing a morning show. We'd have a lot of fun. It'd be crazy. Like if you put me into a studio, right, with my normal energy, right, you put me in a studio with a couple of other people to bounce things off of, right, a couple of other hosts, another host, a producer, a couple of people who come on, we'd have a lot of fun in the morning. It would certainly be an interesting show. You would not compare it to the morning show on the other station. It'd be a totally different vibe, a totally different feel. And I tend to think that we'd probably pull some people in because it would be very unlike a normal Philly sports talk radio show in the morning. But again, I just don't think that there's a path there. Amadeo over here says you'd need a Buc-ee sponsor. That would certainly be interesting. I'd take a Sheets sponsorship. That'd be fine. I saw, by the way, they did the groundbreaking for Sheets in Limerick. I am excited. I am one very excited guy. Let's see. Allison is here. Says, hello. Been a while since I popped in. Hello, Allison. Good to see you. JH with a welcome back. Thank you, JH. I'm just realizing that there were a whole lot of people that I didn't get to earlier. Greg Bondarenko says, good afternoon, all. Are we back to our regularly scheduled Russ Joy shows? Yes, we are. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I might actually try to figure out a concrete time. The school year's starting back up. Got kids that have to get on the bus. The 8:30 thing wasn't working. We're getting close to, I think, coming up with like a solidified time for the show. And when we have it, I will let all of you know. But yes, we are back to Monday, Wednesday, Friday from here on out. Now, I think I got to everything that I wanted to, that I had outlined in the show notes. We talked about Zack Wheeler, about Aaron Nola. We talked about Jon Marks and 97.5, and we got to a couple of other things. We talked about the Buc-ees in Virginia a little bit. There is one other like little bit of news and notes, I guess, and it's a little bit of a follow-up to last week because if you remember, we were talking about the fact that WWE signed with ESPN. We saw UFC go to Paramount, and I said, oh, we're going to come back to that at some point. That might have been 2 weeks ago. There was an interesting note, and I'm very torn because I have this other show. It's Just Wrestling, and it's a show that I haven't done in months. but it's a show that has like a nice following on the YouTube. And I would love to do a deep dive into this, but I need to find a human being to probably do that show with a little bit more consistently. Now, here's what I will tell you. Oh, we got breaking news. Hold on, sorry. We just got breaking news about Zack Wheeler. And I'm going to go out to Anthony Sanfilippo, who just put it out over on Twitter. Let's go out to this news. This is breaking news. This just came through. Sanfilippo says, the Phillies announced Zack Wheeler underwent a successful thrombosis procedure to remove the blood clot. However, no further timeline for him has been determined. So, the blood clot's out. That's great news. Blood clot gone from Zack Wheeler's shoulder area. We are very happy to hear that. We're very thankful to hear that. Said at the top of the show, Zack Wheeler's health. For himself, for his family, that is of the utmost importance. The pitching stuff doesn't matter as much. Good for Zack Wheeler. Let's hope that was the only clot. Let's hope that he gets healed up sooner than later. We're not worried about the baseball of it all. And at the same time, when can he pitch next? I'm kidding, but also, this is the only hope that the Phillies are going to have. So we kind of have to hope that it kind of works out the way that we kind of need it to, which is they kind of need him to pitch. Now, I saw that Sanfilippo updated the tweet. I'm just doing a one-to-one verification here to see. There's a comma there. No, I think we're good. So that's interesting. So Wheeler has a surgery to get the blood clot out. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that changes anything about his timeline. I have to imagine that Zack Wheeler, the pitcher, Zack Wheeler, the ace, Zack Wheeler, the competitor, wants to get back out and pitch. And at the same time, thankfully, we've seen the whole thing about how Zack Wheeler says, like, he cares about baseball and honing his craft and all that. But like when the season's over, he's gone. Remember, like they do the whole thing where like Zack Wheeler doesn't really respond to a lot of teammates, doesn't go out to team dinners or events or anything like after the season. Like that's his family time. I'm not going to say that Zack Wheeler is like 100% of the mindset that like, yo, my life matters more. I'm done for the season. I honestly think that if it's probably the way to go, but if the Phillies and Wheeler came together and said, all right, surgery means that there's a higher likelihood that I can get back out there and be ready for October. Can you imagine what it would be like as a Phillies fan if Zack Wheeler were to be out for a few weeks after getting a freaking blood clot removed from his shoulder? Can you imagine what Citizens Bank Park would sound like if Zack Wheeler comes back and pitches for this team in the playoffs and is an absolute stud? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine how crazy that would be? I don't want to let myself think about it. We care about Zack Wheeler, the human being. If by some divine intervention Zack Wheeler is able to pitch in October, we'll be very grateful and we'll continue to keep our fingers crossed and our Tootsie Toes crossed for him staying healthy. Let's see. So let me get back to the thing that I was talking about a second ago, and then we'll probably close up shop for the day. Chris Freed says you should use the AEW cards at 2300 Arena to restart the wrestling podcast. I know. They've got a residency coming up in September at the 2300 Arena. A little follow-up, something that was like kind of interesting and notable. So the ESPN WWE deal is set to go into effect in 2026. But there is a rumor and a report that's come out that the WWE apparently is thinking about running a show to counter-program an AEW pay-per-view in Toronto called All Out. And if you're an AEW fan, you know there's All In, there's All Out. Now there's Forbidden Door in between. In the past, they've done All In. 2 weeks later is like All Out. It always felt a little bit smushed together. They're going to go do the show Forbidden Door, was this weekend, I guess, at the O2 Arena in London. And then in September, they're doing All Out, and that's going to be in Toronto. Well, apparently WWE, who has now inked this deal with ESPN, is having this conversation about doing a like one-off premium live event on ESPN featuring Brock Lesnar versus John Cena in an attempt to counter-program AEW All Out, which feels insane. And the show is called WrestlePalooza, which is a hearkening back to WrestlePalooza from ECW. I don't know what to make of any of. Oh, I do have thoughts, and I have wrestling specific thoughts, but I don't know how many people on this show will care about them. That's just why I'm very half tempted to bring back the wrestling show, just to go on a very long, in-depth screaming about this decision. But I will note it's interesting that in the midst of all these TV deals where you see an entity like WWE sign the 10 premium live event deal with ESPN, and I listened to the press box, Brian Curtis interviewed Pitaro, who runs ESPN, about having the rest of the library, right? Like Peacock still has the archival footage of all the WWE shows, Raw and SmackDown, all of the other old shows, or any of the old ones that they still have that are available on Peacock, pay-per-views, premium live events, WCW stuff, Nitro, Thunder, much more. That contract goes until 2027, and Curtis asked Pitaro about, will ESPN bid on that archived footage and everything and having the rights to those shows when that deal's up, and it sounds like they will. But in the meantime, they're going to have 10 premium live events a year, plus the exclusive rights, it sounds like, to those shows over the next year plus. It's interesting to me that with a contract currently in place with Peacock for all the premium live events, with a contract in place for Saturday night main event over on NBC, that they're potentially going to create another one-off just to go head-to-head with AEW. I think it's very interesting, and as a wrestling fan, I think it's kind of wild. I think it's a little bit telling, and maybe I'll follow up on it this week on It's Just Wrestling. I'll let you know. Andrew Fawcett's here at the end, says, hey, y'all. Sorry I'm late. It's been a while. Fawcett, welcome, and also bye. Because this is a good time to end today's episode of the Russ Joy Show. I want to thank everybody who joined me live on YouTube, Facebook, and X. I want to thank everybody who listens after the fact in the podcast feed over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Pandora, wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to the show. Leave a 5-star rating, a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts will get read on the show. So that's always a great idea. You can also subscribe to the channel over on YouTube, which I would highly recommend. Why? Thank you for asking. We are getting very close to 1,500 subscribers. I'm looking at it right now. We're at 1,488. We are 12 subscribers away from 1,500. If you've been listening to the show for a while and you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube, now's the time. If you're a podcast listener, do me a favor, still subscribe to the YouTube because it helps. It'd be great if you could do that. I will be back on Wednesday and on Friday with this show. I believe Snow the Goalie comes back this week. We have some stuff that we're working on for that show. Hope to have an update over there sooner rather than later. And maybe I'll feel motivated to do an It's Just Wrestling this week. I will tell you that if you want in-depth Phillies talk, you can go over to the Joy Media YouTube channel or to the Phightin Words YouTube channel or to that podcast feed, and you can go listen to Anthony Sanfilippo and Bob Wankel break down all the biggest news with the Phillies. Of course, that is called Phightin Words. The link to that show, by the way, is in the description of this episode. So, all right, I think I've done enough plugging. Great to be back at home. Great to be back in the home studio. Great to sleep in my own bed after a week of work in New York and Boston, and then a little bit over a week in the Outer Banks. Happy to be home. Happy to be with each and every one of you once again. We're getting close, everybody. Football season is right here. Preseason's going on. Phillies, we want to believe that there's going to be a nice run into October. We're going to cross our fingers and toes for Zack Wheeler and his health. The Flyers are getting close. Union, we believe in the Union. And there might be a basketball team, but I don't know if we believe in them or not. So anyway, until Wednesday, this has been the Russ Joy Show, and I've been Russ Joy, but you knew that already because you're smart. And it's also the name of the show. Talk to each and every one of you on Wednesday here on the Russ Joy Show. Bye now.